Hello, Trail Seekers, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. I am so excited for you to hear today's interview. If you've been struggling with Candida, or if you think maybe you have Candida, or if you know you have some kind of gut dysbiosis, then this is the interview for you. You know, this is only going to be part one because unfortunately my guest was short on time, but he's coming back in a few days and we're going to finish this interview. Listening to part one, though, is going to lay the foundation. I learned so many new things about Candida, and this has been a very important topic to me. So the fact that I learned so many new things, I know you're going to learn so many new things. Your eyes are going to be wide open. You're going to be on the edge of your seat. Then you're going to, just like me, can't wait for part two. I'm so excited to have him back. In a few days, we're going to finish this interview. So that'll be part two. So just watch for that. But in the meantime, strap yourselves in, enjoy today's interview. And if you have any questions for him, this is actually really exciting. We've got a great opportunity. You can listen to part one today, right now, and then come to the Learn True Health Facebook group and type in any questions you have for him. And I'll be sure to include those in my interview that's happening in a few days. So join the Learn True Health Facebook group. Come on down to the Learn True Health Facebook group. We're all friends there. The water's nice. Come on in, jump in, and ask your gut health and gut healing questions, especially about combating and completely eliminating and resolving Candida. I'm so excited to be diving deep into this topic because so many people are suffering from Candida that don't have to be. And it's so fascinating that we get to pick the brain of the world's leading expert on resolving and healing Candida infections. So enjoy today's interview. Please share it with all your friends and family and loved ones and coworkers, just everyone who you know might be interested in gaining better gut health. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the Learn True Health Facebook group. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 486. I am so excited for today's guest. This is a very interesting topic, and in almost 500 episodes, I cannot believe that we have not covered this topic yet. Dr. Biamonte is an expert in several areas, but one which we're going to talk about today is Candida. I am really interested in learning about and diving into this subject, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you. I've heard some of your work, and I'm very pleased that you've chosen me to speak to today.
Absolutely. So the reason why Candida to me is so fascinating is I was 6 years old. This is back in the 80s. My mom ran her own business. So she was gone 10 to 12 hours a day, easily 5 days a week. And she had a cold one day and she went to the MD, and the MD put her on antibiotics, probably for something that was like a virus. Who knows?
Yes.
But she was on antibiotics, and then the cold, wouldn't go away. And looking at it now from the holistic lens, she was running herself ragged. Of course, her body was worn down, and her body was trying to tell her to rest, but she wouldn't even take one day off work. And so 6 months later, she was on nonstop antibiotics for 6 months to handle basically a little cold that wouldn't go away, which we know now, of course, is crazy. But back then, I guess they were playing it real loosey-goosey with antibiotics. And as a result, it totally wiped out all her good bacteria. And she developed a horrible Candida inside her gut and outside. And I just remember her going and finding a naturopathic doctor, and he got her on the anti-Candida diet. This is 1986. And subsequently, I was also very sick, but not with Candida. I didn't know, we didn't know, I had a dairy allergy. And so she took me to the same doctor, and he said, stop doing dairy, stop doing sugar, stop eating processed food. And basically told us to eat the anti-Candida diet that was close to what we would consider paleo today. But they had all these weird rules, like you're not allowed to eat leftovers. It has to be fresh, and you can't have anything with vinegar in it, and no condiments. The list went on and on. Well, sure enough, she got better, and so did I. And that was the rest of my childhood was eating super clean. No sugar was allowed in the house. No flour was allowed in the house. It was a totally different life after that, until I rebelled in my teenage years and went back to eating junk food because I was a teenager and I had to rebel with something. But I watched my health go from bad to good to bad to good every time I chose to eat, what I was told by this naturopath was good versus what everyone else around me was eating. But I watched my mom diligently stick with that anti-candida diet for years, and the candida never returned, and it stuck in my brain. How amazing is that? That she went to a medical doctor, which gave her candida, and the medical doctors could not help her solve the problem. But a naturopath who told her about how healing a food can be if you choose the right foods,
Mhm.
and eventually she was able to overcome it. So when I saw your work and how much has how advanced are we now in the last 36 years, so much more has been discovered and understood, and that's why I'm really excited for you to teach us today about candida now in 2022 as opposed to 1986. So much has happened, and you've been a practitioner for over 30 years, so you've really seen the science and how we can really understand how to heal the body using food and in some cases nutraceuticals, and to support the body's ability to heal itself and to stave off candida. So that's why I'm excited about the work that you do. And I'm really, really excited for my listeners to hear how they can heal their body and prevent candida and remove it from their body should they have it.
I started practicing in 1984,
Ah, there you go.
and in those days, things were very limited. And I learned, people asked me what college I went to, and I said I went to the College of Hard Knocks because I learned a lot of things the hard way. We didn't have tests back then. So when I first encountered Candida, I had been out of naturopathic school for a few years, and I was working with some aerospace engineers at Grumman on Long Island because that's where I was from. I was from Long Island. And I ran into these aerospace engineers who were working at Grumman. They were working on a computer model of the human body that NASA approached them to design. They wanted this computer software so that they could use it to analyze or interpret the astronauts' blood work when they were in the space station for long periods of time, because they were concerned about negative calcium balance and nitrogen balance. When you're in space and you're weightless for that amount of time, you can start having muscle loss, you can start having bone loss. And fortunately, one of the people who was the head of the project that I was working with and I became very close with was the same man who designed the life support systems on the lunar module, Dr. Robert Santoro, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And I worked with him on constructing this model for about 3 or 4 years. And unfortunately, NASA canceled the project on us because it was getting a bit expensive. And they weren't anticipating that they were going to get back the amount of investment that they were putting in, and that was partially our fault because we had an expense budget and we were flying doctors into Long Island from all over the world, all famous nutritionists who were all adding to the model. Everyone had their own data and research that was sort of privy to them. So we asked them at this point, because we almost had the model complete. And now what this model could do, this was computer software that was designed in, they call it table-driven. And table-driven software now allows you to take a datum and insert it at a different spot so that you don't have to rewrite the whole program. So we were almost finished with this, and we asked them, "Well, what are we going to do with this? I mean, this project is almost done, but you're not going to complete it." So they said, "We don't care what you do; you can keep it." So we took the model and we started to offer it to physicians. And what a physician would do would be draw some blood on their patients, have an SMA 24 or 26, which is pretty standard blood work done. And then we'd ask them to do a tissue mineral analysis on their patients, which was typically hair or nails, but it's commercially hair nowadays. And then whatever other tests they wanted to do. If it was a chiropractor, they could tell us what particular subluxations their patient usually had. So we gave them a diagram of the spine, and they would circle like L1, T4, C2, or whatever typically came up, and then we would input this data in the computer, and the computer would actually run a simulated version of their body, and it would look for errors. And then from the product module we had that was loaded with different supplements, like from Standard Process or Metagenics or NutraWest, all these different companies, the computer would then select supplements that it would recommend to fix whatever was wrong, and it would then recommend a diet based on their blood type and other things. And we had a lot of doctors using it back in those days. A lot of people were getting really good results, but there was this certain population of people, and I estimated it was about 30 to 35% of the people who would run through the model that got crazy results. Like they would take the vitamins and get worse, or they would take the supplements and have crazy reactions. So I volunteered to figure out what was going on with that group of people. And it took a while. I studied all their folders. My wife when my wife tells the story, she always talks about walking into the room and seeing this big stack of folders on the desk that were higher than I was. And here I am going through this, and what I eventually found out was that all these people had some kind of disturbance in their digestive system. I found that their intestinal tract was fighting something. There was some type of immune response going on there, and they were also having a lot of allergies to the supplements they were taking. Eventually, I found out that what it was Candida. Now, I didn't know really much about Candida. I thought it was some fad from California for all I knew. And I remember the pop song Candida. That was really all I knew. So I hit the textbooks and I studied and I understood what it was. And I told the people, you have Candida, go to your medical doctor, tell him you have this, let him clear it up and then come back and we'll put you back on the program and it should work. That's how stupid I was. The people came back and they said, the doctor says he doesn't know what Candida is, or he doesn't know how to treat it, or some doctors were saying, well, we don't know anything about it at all. So I told them, well, what you have to do then is find a doctor who knows about this. And then so I looked it up and I found Dr. Atkins at the time and Ronald Hoffman and Dr. Toplitsky and these different alternative functional doctors in New York City. And I said, well, go to those guys. They know about this. So they went and then they came back to me and they said, well, yeah, they said you were right. I did have Candida, and they put me on a treatment and I got better for a while and then I kept relapsing. So then I said, geez, I got to figure this out. So I spent the next 30 years studying Candida and unraveling all its tricks. And then eventually I wrote my book, The Candida Chronicles, which we took the name from our newsletter that we had for many years, which was just giving out information on all my discoveries about Candida. And it was very interesting because sure enough, when we cleared these people up of Candida and put them back on the programs, they did fine. So that experience was empirical to a degree. I mean, there was a lot that I've learned from the textbooks, but I essentially reversed engineered the whole thing in order to figure it out. So I would listen to the patients and I would listen to what they said worked and didn't work. And then I would go and look in the textbooks to figure out why that was. And that's essentially how I developed my Candida treatment. I didn't do it based on dogmatic laws that I thought had to be followed or data that was old or whatnot, or insisting on certain things had to be a certain way. It was more by listening to people, figuring out why something would work and wouldn't work, and then understanding it through the existing knowledge that we had. One of the first datums I came across was in the Merck Manual, which is a book that most doctors have in their office. And the Merck Manual regarding candidiasis said that Candida is caused by the indiscriminate use of broad-spectrum antibiotics, and that if you continue to treat Candida only vaginally, you will not get a result. The patient will not recover. You need to treat it concurrently also in the intestinal tract. When I read that, it all made sense. Then that's when I understood what it was I was seeing in their lab book. Because in the lab work of these people, there was a pattern in their white blood cells that was indicating an intestinal infection. So that's where a lot of it started for me. Then I just began to continue to deconstruct and reconstruct it and reverse engineer it until I got the program correct. And then at that point, then I wrote the book several years ago. When once I felt I had enough of the secrets and the tricks that it plays, where someone could read the book and then have a workable solution, that's when I decided I was actually going to write the book. So that's from when I first started studying Candida in 1987 to 2000, like let's say 16. So there you go. So that's a little bit of time. But that's how
Right?
confusing Candida can be.
I'm fascinated. You said that when you looked at their blood work, you could tell that the white blood cells were there was a like a storm going on inside the intestines. You could see that based on blood work. Can you talk a bit
Oh yeah,
about
it's it's
that?
a it's very simple. When your neutrophils are low, approaching below normal, and your lymphocytes are high, approaching above normal, that pattern, low neutrophils, high lymphocytes, is the pattern for an intestinal infection.
Whoa. Do all doctors know that?
No, they don't.
This drives me crazy. And so how did you know that?
There are some additives you can put on that. Also, very commonly, you'll see elevated monocytes and eosinophils at the same time.
So did you learn that through this trial and error, like listening to the patient and then going back and looking in the textbooks? Is that how you discovered this?
No, that actual pattern I learned from Dr. Ken Brockman, who was a barnstorming chiropractor back in the 80s, who was working on interpreting blood work using a combination of kinesiology and the blood work. So what he would do is Brockman would take a guy, he would use kinesiology to figure out what was wrong, and then he would look in the blood work to spot it in the blood work, and then he would duplicate this in enough people where he knew that that pattern in the blood work meant whatever it was.
That is fascinating. From an outsider's perspective, right? Someone who's raised in the mainstream medical system to believe that you wait to get sick and then go to an MD and get put on a drug, like that mentality, that lens that they see health through, which is actually disease management, not health. You look at kinesiology and you think this is total witchcraft, right? It's quackery, it's snake oil. But then if you go and have a session and do kinesiology, I've several times, many different practitioners, and then you can see it. You can whatever they find in the kinesiology, they can then back up by looking in other places, like you said, lab work, and they can find it. And it is absolutely fascinating. But from a quantum perspective, we are more energy than we are matter,
True.
right? So
Yep.
of course there's a way to communicate with the body other than physical, other than what we see is what we get. I love that. That is so fascinating.
And this is where you're going to find the validity in Vega testing or the Rife machine and so many of these other tests that have existed and have advanced over the years that are based on frequencies in the body. I've
Hmm.
used them all, including kinesiology, and they all have validity and they all work and they all helped me to understand what I understand today. The problem is they're not exacting. In the field of engineering, which I heavily rely on because when I was growing up as a little baby doctor, all the people that I was surrounded by were all engineers. When I worked at Grumman Aerospace on that project, I worked with a group of doctors who were all systems analysis engineers, and they all had degrees in physiology. So I learned to view the body as an engineer,
Hmm.
which is what the way all health practitioners should be studied, and this is where holistic medicine tries to come in. But because they don't follow engineering doctrines, let's say, they can fall short. But this is where it comes from. You have to the body as a system, a large collection of systems and subsystems which all work back and forth. And where we got the name actually biocybernetics. Biocybernetics refers to the study of self-regulating mechanisms, biological self-regulating mechanisms. This is also where the word homeostasis would come from. This is the body's ability to try to maintain a balance. But when the body gets off balance, it then seeks to hold on to a balance which may not be correct because that's what it knows. And what many times what chiropractors and doctors are doing is they're trying to re-educate the system, sort of like rebooting your computer to come back to a normal maintenance level, a normal balance. And this is where Candida comes in, because Candida, like many other infections or illnesses, continues to throw that balance off. The body continues to try to compensate for the presence of this organism. This is what makes it so interesting.
So when you say the body keeps adjusting, what kind of symptoms, like from an
Well, first off, the first thing to establish is that Candida is normal in the body.
okay.
Candida is a fungus or a yeast. It's a chameleon-like organism. It's sometimes called dimorphic, which what dimorphic means to live in two different states. So Candida can be in your body as a yeast, which women experience vaginally, or it can be in your intestinal tract as a fungus, which is part of your normal flora. It's part of the normal aggregate of all the microbes in your intestinal tract, your biome, which becomes a popular term nowadays. The problem is if you take antibiotics or if you take different medications, it kills the friendly bacteria which balance the Candida out in the food chain. There is a
Hmm.
food chain in your intestinal tract when it comes to microbes. And the food chain basically is that the friendly gram-negative E. coli bacteria act as a neutral area, and the gram-positive bacteria, which is the Lactobacillus bifidus and Lactobacillus acidophilus species, are the more aggressive bacteria that actually use Candida as a food and stimulate your immune system, help your body manufacture vitamins, help you absorb nutrients, etc. And when you take something, an antibiotic, for instance, or a steroid drug, or chemotherapy, or even antacid pills like Tums, they can kill your friendly bacteria, and that allows Candida then to go unchecked. The Candida no longer has a governor there to balance it, so it grows and it becomes dominant where it's not supposed to become dominant. It grows out of control. And once Candida grows to a population more than it should be, or as a dominant part of your flora, now it's excreting alcohols into your body because it's a yeast. So what does yeast do? When you give yeast sugar, it ferments, it produces alcohol. So now you have alcohol levels in your body rising where they shouldn't be. You have mycotoxins, which are toxins that are formed by yeast and fungus going into your nervous system. You have all types of other. I think total there's over 50 different toxins we can identify that Candida releases into your body, and they affect you neurologically, which is why you find so many children with autism have Candida. And children
Wow.
with autism, the prerequisites for a child to be autistic, as far as I'm concerned, are number one, he's got to be born with a set of genes that make him a really bad detoxifier, and
Hmm.
then he happens to get an overload of toxins from the old vaccines that had thimerosal, or from the mercury in his fillings, and that affects him neurologically. But back to the person here. The person now has this Candida overgrown in his body, and it's releasing all these toxins. The toxins are causing multiple problems. They're causing him to have brain fog. He loses his memory. He gets rashes. He gets asthma. He gets digestive problems. He's bloating. He's burping. He's farting. He's doing all these things. And the guy is saying to himself, gee, where did all this come from? Because it's these symptoms you wouldn't necessarily associate having lower gas with brain fog. You see?
Hmm.
So the symptoms that Candida can produce are of such a spectrum that it can be very confusing, and you would never think that this was all coming from the same place. Then, when you have the fact that diet changes it, if the guy eats sugar or too many carbs, it feeds the Candida. Now you have more toxins forming. He goes into a toxic environment where his body absorbs mercury or copper or lead or something. Well, then that further makes the Candida worse. You see, he goes into a hot, humid environment. Well, think about what fungus and molds in hot, humid environments. Well, that's going to make it worse. See, so all of these things are going on around him, and he can't quite put his finger on what's happening, but he knows that all of these different changes in his diet, changes when he takes medicines or vitamins, because vitamins aggravate Candida, was one of the things a lot of people don't know. B complex vitamins taken in the presence of sugar or carbohydrate would drive Candida crazy. Because what did B complex do? B complex break down carbs into simpler forms of sugar for your body to absorb. Well, guess who's standing right there waiting to absorb those sugars? It's the Candida. Vitamin CoQ10 can aggravate Candida. Vitamin D and iron can spread Candida. In fact, some of the pharmaceuticals, the common ones like ketoconazole and nystatin, how they actually work is by blocking the Candida's ability to absorb iron and vitamin D so you can kill the Candida. So you have all these things. These things are going on, and this is what makes it such a mystery. This is why it could only be solved. This mystery of Candida probably could have only been solved by someone like myself who was looking at it from the viewpoint of an engineer.
And you're not looking to wipe Candida out because, again, that's more of the medical doctor. The MD system is let's throw a nuclear bomb at the body and wipe something out. But that is also just leaving the body susceptible to whatever is going to kind of grow in its place. And we need Candida, like you said, it's food for those good bacteria.
Right. So you need a certain amount of it, and you couldn't knock it out totally even if you tried. I've never found that to be even possible because it's so intrinsic to the gut that you got to have some. So it's not even possible to do that. But yeah, that would be a more allopathic viewpoint.
Right, to wipe it all out.
Yeah, but it doesn't work, if you try to do that. So here you have the person now. They have all these symptoms going on, and there are all these different causation points, and they're utterly confused as to what it's all about, what's happening. Now, if they go on the internet, I don't know if that's good or bad. They're going to learn something about it, but then there's the old adage that a little knowledge can be dangerous when it's incomplete. And you're going to get people who start self-treating, and that I've never met anybody actually. I've heard of a few people, but I've never actually met anybody who actually self-treated and got rid of their Candida. The best I've been able to ascertain that people have done is by staying forever on a very strict diet. A diet so strict that most people wouldn't want to do it. They've managed to maintain their symptoms. See, because Candida is literally a plant. And as a plant, it grows roots. And these roots permeate your tiny blood vessels in your intestinal tract to draw glucose, to draw sugar out so that Candida can stay alive. So if you go on a very strict diet, anti-Candida diet, you can starve the Candida down to the point where, like a wilted plant, it has not so much activity, but those roots are still there. So once you go off the diet, within a few weeks, the Candida grows right back. It blooms to its former glory, and it's starting to spew out all kinds of toxins once again, and you're right back in the same boat.
So in order to bring it back into balance, you must bring what eats Candida back into balance.
Yes, that is the goal. And I preach this to my patients. The whole goal of my treatment plan is to reduce the Candida enough to where we can get the friendly bacteria to take over again. And that sounds easy, but it's not as simple as just giving the person a probiotic. on the step of my program where we reintroduce probiotics, in order to get to that step, the person has to have reduced their amount of Candida, their total amount, by at least like 90%. And we have ways of measuring that with the urine test that we do.
Really?
Yeah. They've got to have it down by at least 90%, and they need to take a series of prebiotics. Now, a probiotic is the actual good bacteria, like the Acidophilus or the Bifidus. The prebiotic, theoretically, could be any substance that aids the probiotic in returning or in multiplying or attaching itself back to the lining of the intestine. And while Candida does not do permanent damage to people, there is something that Candida does to the intestinal tract, and we never figured out exactly what that is, but it does do something that makes it harder for the friendly bacteria to come back. I speculate it does something to alter the collagen in the intestinal lining that makes it a little harder for the friendly bacteria to reattach or reinoculate, as we would say.
Wow.
But nonetheless, that's the whole game. The whole game is get your Candida low enough to where the probiotics will come back. And very rarely does anybody accomplish that, because you have to handle the candida like peeling an onion. It's layers. The step that we do right before we put the person on the probiotics is we give them antifungals, which are fatty acid based, because those fatty acid based antifungals are the only thing that can kill the candida deep enough in its roots to then allow the space for the probiotics to come back where the candida won't repel. Because the average person with candida who takes probiotics, the probiotics will lower the pH of their intestines, which is the good thing. The candida loves the pH of your intestinal tract to be like over 7.4. Your body wants it to be between 6 to 7.2. When you take the probiotics acidify your intestinal tract. That's where we get the word acidophilus from. Acidophilus. Because the acidophilus releases acids, hydrogen peroxides, and different things which lower the pH. So when your pH lowers in your intestinal tract, a lot of the candida symptoms stop. But once you stop taking the acidophilus or the probiotic, the pH comes right back up again, and then you have the same story. But that is the goal. The goal is to take the probiotics and the prebiotics and get that reestablished. Then once that's reestablished, then you can go and look at other aspects of what's going on, like does the candida produces different vitamin deficiencies, or the candida as a causative agent might be involved with mercury toxicity. Once you reestablish your probiotics, then you're free and clear to go handle all those other issues. But if you try to do it the other way around, like there is a doctor, I won't mention his name, he's very famous, he's in the Midwest. His whole gig that he preaches to people is you've got to get rid of the mercury, otherwise the candida is going to come back, you'll never get rid of it. So he takes everybody and he puts them on a mercury detox. And over the years, I've gotten so many patients from this doctor who have come to me because they couldn't handle his program that it's embarrassing. And it doesn't work, because when you start to pull mercury out of somebody who has candida, that mercury comes through your intestinal tract. Your liver dumps it in your intestinal tract as a way to try to get rid of it. It wants to put it in your stool. But guess who's sitting right there with his arms open? There's the candida's right there saying, give me the mercury. Somebody even came up with this wild theory that your body produced candida as a protective mechanism to help against mercury toxicity. Well, that's total nonsense. Candida absorbs mercury and it uses it as kind of like a nutrient, but mercury depresses fecal IgE and fecal IgA. So no wonder if you have mercury, you get candida, because it dampens your intestinal immune response. It's not there helping. That's not what it's doing. Mercury and copper and other toxic elements, when they're in your intestinal tract, will actually lower and suppress your intestinal immunity, and that allows the candida to grow.
So if someone has like that, I have this problem. I've been working on detoxing heavy metals, and I'm one of those people you mentioned that just is not great at detoxing. I've got MTHFR. My liver's, came in last in the race. And I'm doing everything I can naturally to support my body's ability to detox heavy metals, and it really helps. All the natural stuff I do really helps. But what you're saying is that when our body or liver removes these heavy metals, puts it in the bile to be placed into the intestines so that we poop it out, we're not pooping it out, because if there's candida overgrowth, which so many people have, it's really, really common, which is just crazy, because those drugs you mentioned, steroids, antacids, even chemotherapy and antibiotics, everyone's taken at least an antacid or an antibiotic or a steroid. It's very, very, very rare that someone's not had any of those drugs. So there's so many people walking around with candida imbalance. And then if they're like me and they are like overly toxic with heavy metals, if they start doing some kind of heavy metal detox, then the liver's pumping it into the intestines to be released, and then the candida is right there sucking it up and basically keeping it in your body, even though it's not inside your body, it's inside your intestines, which is then, like you said, lowering the immunoglobulin immune system to support the body in fighting off infection. And then that just that's like almost, the candida is almost protecting its own environment.
Yes.
By sucking up the heavy metals. that then it's like they're wearing a coat of armor protecting themselves against our immune system.
And this is why you'll occasionally hear of doctors who will tell their patients that when you go on this Candida elimination program, don't be surprised if you start re-experiencing symptoms of toxic metals or a toxic metal detox, because when the Candida dies, it releases the metal. This is why in my phase zero program is very specifically designed to be able to absorb toxic metals that come from the Candida when we first start to eliminate it.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to get into the discussion of die off, but before we do that, I wanted to go back because you'd mentioned something. It sounded like biofilm when you said you hypothesized that Candida creates its own collagen to protect itself, to create its own little environment that not only protects itself but also uses up the space so that the other healthy bacteria can't kind of get in there and start eating up the Candida. Is that biofilm?
Yes, it is. That is what biofilm does. Biofilm is produced by a particular type of bacteria. It's not all bacteria, but it's certain bacteria. And these bacteria release this mucus, slimy substance to cover themselves, to cover parasites, to cover Candida in order to protect them, to protect itself. And this is even before we knew about biofilm, we knew that this phenomena existed of cluster bacteria. If you were in a little ship and you could drive through your intestinal tract and look around with cameras and lights and whatnot, you would see that Candida doesn't grow in a uniform manner. Candida grows in a splotchy, uneven format. And this is why people will have Candida, and you'll find in those clusters of Candida, you'll also find harmful bacteria and parasites. They're all synergistic and symbiotic, so they all tend to cluster together. We knew that before we knew that also biofilm was being produced in those areas.
Do you, as part of your program, to strip away biofilm in
Yes,
the
it
intestine?
has to be. Our phase zero program addresses that, the
Very
biofilm.
cool. Yeah, that's such a big deal. Like, I have so many questions for you, and I definitely want to have you back on my show. I know that you are really crunched on time right now, and we have just begun to open up this Pandora's box of Candida. Your book, I'm going to make sure the links to all your websites and your book is in the show notes of today's podcast at learnchild.com. We're definitely going to have you back because I've got like 10 more questions and then I want to dive into how we can start to fight this. But just letting people know that this exists, they're going to start listening to the symptoms of their body and going, wait a second, I really need to read the Candida Chronicles and I really need to look into this further. So you do have at-home tests. Could you please let the listeners know what you have? 3 websites and you have at-home tests. Please let the listeners know what are the websites and what steps should they take to follow you and start learning from you?
The main website is health-truth.com. The 2 other websites are the New York City Candida Doctor. It might be the New York City Yeast Doctor. I think they might have changed the domain, but it's either the New York City Yeast Doctor or Candida Doctor and the New York City Thyroid Doctor. Why we have a thyroid website is because Candida hits your thyroid and your adrenals the hardest. And the one thing you can be guaranteed is after you handle a Candida patient and you get them out of the acute phase of Candida, you're going to need to do something to restore thyroid and adrenal function. Many people treat themselves for Candida forever because they still think they have it, even though they have it suppressed or in remission. What they're experiencing now is adrenal and thyroid exhaustion, and they confuse it with still having Candida. So that's why we have to separate those things out.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're definitely going to have you back because we've got to dive in. We've just sort of opened up Pandora's box and we're going to dive in with the next episode. And I know you're crunched on time, so I really appreciate that you took the time today to talk to us, and we'll have you back on soon to continue this discussion.
Okay, great.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Dr. Biamonte. Wasn't that amazing? And this is just the beginning. We have just scratched the surface. Come join the Learn Child Facebook group. Ask your questions about Candida. I know some questions have bubbled up for you after hearing just this first part. And oh man, I have my list of questions. I am so excited to dig into him next time. I've got him on the schedule for early October. So jump in to the Learn to Health Facebook group and let me know what questions you have for him. Let's tap into the community, into the hive mind, and let's come up with some really great ones for him. And my next interview with him will just be digging in deep, figuring out like all the whys and the hows, and getting the plan of action that we can take so that we can take each step to resolving Candida. But please, ask away. I'm sure you guys have got some great questions, as do I. Let's all join heads and think of what we can say to him. If you don't have Facebook and you're not able to come on the Learn to Health Facebook group, you can always email me, ashley@learntruehealth.com. Although you're missing out because the Learn to Health Facebook group is pretty awesome. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your day and stay tuned. Make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen. If you listen on iTunes or Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you're listening from, or even just learntruehealth.com, you could be listening on my website. Whatever app you're using, make sure you subscribe and make sure that you've got your notifications on, so when I do list part 2, that it'll be up there for you. And please give us a 5-star rating and review if you love my show, if it's made a difference for you. I absolutely love it when I hear back from listeners and I see your reviews. It means so much to me. It warms my heart. It motivates me to keep going when I know that I'm helping you guys. So you can help me in return by leaving a 5-star rating review. I'd love to see that. And also, if you haven't already, come check out the learntruehealth.com website. We spent all summer long revamping it, and it looks totally different. It's super cool. There's a choose your own self-healing journey on the homepage. Just scroll down, you'll see that, and you'll find all kinds of really cool content there. So go to learntruehealth.com, check out our new website. Let me know what you think about it. And hopefully I'll see you in the Learn to Health Facebook group soon. If you don't know how to find that, you can go to learntruehealth.com/group. That's learntruehealth.com/group, and it'll take you there. Awesome. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you in part 2 of this interview soon.